Hi everyone, it's Heather from Courageous Hearts, and I'm super excited today to talk about resiliency. It is like one of my favorite topics, and especially right now during this COVID-19 global pandemic, it's really relevant. So let's just jump right in and let's talk about resiliency. Okay, so some people define resiliency as the ability basically to navigate through a challenge and change and to bounce back, specifically after a stressful or traumatic event. So this is great and all, and this is one definition, but let's take it another step. What if we were to bounce back after an adversity like this COVID-19 global pandemic, and not only did we bounce back to where we were before, but we actually took a step forward and we used this experience to grow and to uplift ourselves and to come to a greater level of unity and connection with each other. Just saying, that's my ideal. Let's keep going here. Okay, so the other thing about resiliency, there's this misconception out there that resiliency, like people who are resilient, are those people that grew up under the hardest of circumstances and they became these really successful, famous people in the world. And that's an example of a resilient person, and they were born with resiliency. And then there's some people that they don't have any resiliency. This is actually not true. It is not a trait that people have or do not have. It actually involves actions and thoughts that we can learn over time. So resilience is something that can be built in anybody. And for all you educators out there, this is a really good time to share these actions and thoughts with young people, because the best time to build the trait of resilience is when we're younger, and we can start to form those ideas and those neural networks in the brain. So let's go ahead and move on here. I want to talk a little bit about the 4 steps of resiliency. And if you notice, this is a really, really great diagram, and I want to give a shout out to Dr. Angela Smith. Make sure that you all know that this came from her. I did add the radical self-care little yellow highlighted area. On this diagram, you have the y-axis on the left-hand side as being resiliency level from the low to high. On the bottom, you have the x-axis, and we're going to talk about that. It says destructive behaviors, and if there are destructive behaviors, the resiliency level is going to go down, but we also want to talk about that x-axis as being over time, because we are in a process right now, and we're continually moving. There's a lot of change going on. So on the left-hand side, you see where it says adversity, and there's an arrow. Adversity hits, and it will impact everybody in a different way, and it will really depend on the person's level of resiliency and how that affects them. Also, if a person has a very strong, solid foundation of self-care and protective factors around them, they will be able to bounce back quicker from the adversity. So let's talk about these steps. No matter how quickly somebody bounces back, they will go through these 4 steps or stages. The first stage is, as you see on the right-hand side there on the bottom, survival. And we totally saw this in this COVID-19 thing in March, where people were going and they were hoarding toilet paper and food. And some people were having years and years worth of toilet paper, and it just wasn't enough. And what was really going on is they were in the survival mode, and people wanted to try to feel safe because we had no control of this thing coming and hitting. That was an area we don't have control. I'll talk in a minute where we do have control. So that is the first step. I look at the world, and most people are through that. Some people are still in that survival mode, but most people have moved on to adaptation, where they are starting to basically make some changes in themselves to adapt to this big new, I don't want to say new normal, but I do want to say that there's been a change and people are adapting. And in this stage, there's an internal change that starts to happen. And I'm going to go to the next slide, because this slide is very similar You see the 4 steps on the right-hand side, survival and adaptation is second, and it gives us a little bit more information about the steps and stages. So in this stage also there's less feeling victimized, and we realize that we have control on how we're going to respond. We can decide and we can choose, and in that is empowerment. So the third step or phase is recovery. We start to recover, we accept that there has been a significant change and the world will never be the same again, but the good news is we can then move on to the 4th stage, and we can take this experience and we can actually mine some gold out of it. We can take the learnings. We will certainly be stronger as a result of going through the adversity, because that is the very definition of building resilience. You cannot build resilience without adversity, and we've all gone through that. We can also consciously decide to come out the other end actually better from when we went in. And those are the tools that I want to give educators to facilitate this process. And what that looks like is opening conversations with young people about some of the positive things that are going on, some of the silver linings. There are people out there that are making lemonade from lemons, and they are standing forward in leadership. They're sharing their caring and their hearts in the world. People are coming together courageously to be helpers. Mr. Rogers would say, my mom used to always say, look for the helpers. And I think part of the reason he said that is because it ignites hope in us. So this is the conversation. I don't want to pretend that there isn't sickness and people are dying and the economy is being impacted. And there is also a lot of positive that is starting to come out of this. And that's the conversation to have with your students. That's the conversation to get them to start thinking about how they're growing from this, how they can take this experience and not only just get through it, but to leverage it to build their confidence, to learn and to grow. I have one last slide for you. In terms of working with students, these are some great questions. Hey, yes, things are changing. We're not going to go back to the way things were, but the good news is we can take the things that were working, and you can take those things and keep them in your life. And then you can choose to let go of things that weren't working back then anyway. And then what do you want to be different? What do you want to create? Because now is the time that there's great change going on the planet, and there is an energy of flux. So we can create new things right now. And there's also, especially in education, there's this big pause that is happening. People have time to start putting new self-care routines in place and to start looking at their lives from a place of altitude in that pause and seeing what do I want to be different? And then to direct students into some of the silver linings and maybe show videos of some of the good news. They're seeing a lot of the negative news and the stuff that is really challenging to accept. Mix in some of the good things that are going on, some of the heroes, some of the leaders. I would highly recommend that. So that's all I have for you today. I so hope that it was useful. And as always, stay safe, stay strong, and stay healthy.